The first shove came without warning. Her sketchbook slid across the polished floor, pages scattering like startled birds. Laughter rose in the hallway, sharp and merciless, as if daring her to cry. But she only bent to gather the pages, slowly, deliberately, her hands steady. Something had shifted. By the end of this day, they would learn that the girl they tried to break was not built to bend. The first bell of the day had already faded into silence, leaving the hallway of Hillsborough High bathed in the flat, unwavering glare of overhead lights. Lockers lined both sides like sentinels, their doors splashed with colors and stickers, the chatter of early arrivals still echoing faintly from nearby classrooms. Amina Carter stepped lightly along the corridor, her shoulders drawn in, the black sketchbook pressed firmly against her chest. She had learned, in the few days since she transferred here, that moving quietly was the best way to pass unseen. Her bright yellow hoodie caught the light, a sunburst in the monotone hallway, but her gaze stayed fixed on the floor tiles, as if the world beyond them could be kept at bay. Ahead, a group of students broke into laughter. Brent Colson stood at the center of them, his red and gold varsity jacket a signal of his place in the school's hierarchy. His broad shoulders blocked the narrow stretch of floor as Amina approached. The crowd parted just enough for her to pass. She angled her body, hoping to slip by without a word. The shove came without warning. A firm, deliberate thrust to her shoulder sent her stumbling sideways. Her sketchbook twisted in her arms, papers spilling like startled birds, scattering across the polished floor. The sharp thud of her fall drew a ripple of reactions, some gasps, some smirks, most eyes darting away as though they had seen nothing. No one moved to help her. From the far end of the hall, a different sound cut through the low murmur. The steady tread of boots, purposeful and unhurried. Elias Moore had been mopping near the service closet when he heard the impact. His eyes found the small figure on the floor, then the tall boy looming above her. In 4 long strides he was there. His arm came up, firm and unshakable, planting a hand against Brent's chest. "Back up," Elias said, his voice calm, but carrying a weight that made the air feel still. Brent blinked, caught off guard for a moment before his expression hardened. "You serious? You are just the janitor." Elias did not flinch. His gaze held Brent's without a single twitch. Slowly, the boy took a step back, his mouth curling into a half-smile that held no warmth. Amina gathered her sketchbook and the loose papers with quiet precision. She did not look at either of them. Hugging the book tightly once more, she slipped through the ring of onlookers, her footsteps quick and measured. The hallway began to breathe again, voices rising in low, restless whispers. As Elias turned to retrieve the mop he had left behind, a boy from the crowd leaned close enough for only him to hear. "You know who she is," the boy murmured, his tone tinged with a strange mix of awe and warning. The question hung in the air like a match poised over dry tinder. The hallway had already emptied, leaving only the faint echo of voices from behind closed classroom doors. The faint smell of floor polish lingered, mixing with the metallic tang of old lockers. Elias pushed his mop cart slowly toward the janitor's closet, his mind replaying the moment in the hall. Amina on the floor, papers scattered, Brent's smirk. He had seen scenes like that before. Not in this building, not in the safety of a school, but in places where cruelty came without warning and the ones who stood by chose to remain silent. As he rolled the cart past the faculty lounge, 2 voices drifted through the half-open door. The tone was low, but not low enough. "Amina Carter, that is Lillian Carter's daughter," one of them said. The voice belonged to Mrs. Jeffries, a math teacher who rarely spoke above a whisper in staff meetings. Elias froze just outside the doorway. The name struck like a hammer. "You mean General Lillian Carter?" the other voice asked. "Yes," Mrs. Jeffries replied. "The Lillian Carter, Pentagon clearance, served in multiple campaigns overseas. People say she is the reason some towns still stand." Elias stood motionless, the hallway around him suddenly too quiet. The name was carved deep in his memory, though it belonged to a woman he had never truly met, at least not in the way people met in normal life. He left the cart parked against the wall and stepped into the dim light of the janitor's closet. The air inside was warm and close, the smell of cleaning agents sharp. He leaned against the counter and closed his eyes. The memory came without invitation. Sand, smoke, the distant crack of rifle fire. It had been late in the day, the horizon a dull orange, smeared by dust. His unit had been deployed to extract wounded personnel from a convoy ambushed along a narrow desert road. Radio static had drowned half the orders. When the call came through, it was ragged, barely human, a woman's voice, breathless, cutting in and out. Pinned, bleeding, coordinates, then a burst of static. Elias had moved before anyone told him to. The wreckage was twisted metal against the dirt, the vehicle on its side, one wheel spinning lazily. Inside, under the bent door frame, a soldier lay pinned, blood dark against her uniform. Her helmet visor was cracked, streaked with grit, but her eyes, steady, unflinching, locked on him as he crawled into the smoke. "I have you," he had said, his voice louder than he intended, forcing it past the ringing in his ears. He had lifted the doorframe with a grunt, ignoring the pain in his shoulders, and pulled her free. She winced but said nothing, her jaw set. With one arm around her back and the other gripping his rifle, he carried her over open ground while tracers lit the air above. Every step had been measured, deliberate. Not once did she let her gaze falter. When they reached the medic station, someone had pulled her from his arms, and within moments she was gone, loaded onto a helicopter that disappeared into the horizon. He never learned her name. Until now, perhaps? Elias opened his eyes. The closet was still, but his heart was not. He needed to know if the connection he felt was only coincidence or something far heavier. Later that morning, when the school quieted during class, he made his way to the security monitor room. As head custodian, he had clearance to check the feeds for maintenance purposes. Broken lights, faulty door locks, water leaks. Today, he used it for something else. He keyed in the date from the previous week and brought up the east hallway feed. There she was, Amina Carter, walking along the lockers with her shoulders slightly hunched, steps quick but soundless. Her eyes stayed down, scanning nothing beyond the floor. Clip after clip showed the same pattern. She entered classrooms moments before the bell, left just as the next class was about to begin, always keeping close to the wall. In the cafeteria, she sat at the farthest table from the crowd, her lunch tray pushed aside while she kept her sketchbook open in front of her. The sketchbook was always there. In some frames, her arms were wrapped around it like armor. In others, she turned a page with care, her eyes locked on the paper as though the world beyond it could not touch her. Elias leaned closer to the monitor. He had seen that kind of silence before, not the silence of peace, but the silence of someone who had learned that speaking drew danger. A part of him wanted to walk into that cafeteria, pull up a chair, and simply tell her she was not alone. Another part reminded him of the warning in the faculty lounge. If she truly was the daughter of General Lillian Carter, her life carried shadows most people could not see. The bell rang, jolting him back to the present. He shut down the monitor and left the room. That afternoon, he crossed paths with her again near the art wing. She was sitting on the floor by a row of lockers, cross-legged beneath a tall window that poured light across the tiles. Her head was bent over the sketchbook in her lap, the pencil in her hand moving with quiet certainty. He slowed his steps, not wanting to break the moment. For a heartbeat, the hallway felt like another world, just the sound of graphite on paper, the dust motes drifting in the light. Then she looked up. For a second, their eyes met. It was not gratitude he saw there, nor fear. It was something sharper, harder to name, recognition, perhaps, though of what, he could not tell. She closed the sketchbook with deliberate care and hugged it to her chest. Standing, she slung her bag over one shoulder. In the motion, the bag slipped, and her wallet tumbled to the floor. Before she could snatch it up, Elias's gaze caught on the photo visible in the clear sleeve. It was Amina, younger by several years, standing beside a tall woman in full army dress uniform. Rows of ribbons crossed the woman's chest. The brim of her cap cast a shadow over her eyes, but not enough to hide them. Elias knew those eyes. He had seen them through a cracked visor, under a sky filled with smoke and fire. He had carried them through open ground while the world burned behind them. General Lillian Carter. By the time he lifted his gaze, Amina had already retrieved the wallet and slipped it deep into her bag. Her face was unreadable, but her voice, when it came, was quiet and precise. "Thank you for earlier," she said. Elias nodded once. "Anytime." She turned and walked away, her steps quick. The black sketchbook pressed tight against her chest. Elias stood in the hallway long after she had vanished around the corner, his mind caught between the present and a memory from a desert far from here. The name was no longer a rumor in the faculty lounge. It was a truth, standing in front of him, walking these halls alone. And that truth carried with it a history he could not ignore. The art wing was always quieter than the rest of the school. The walls lined with framed student work, their colors dulled by years of sun. Elias was replacing a ceiling tile above the doorway when he heard the sound of heels clicking across the polished floor. Kayla Torres appeared from the main hallway, a stack of portfolios cradled in her arms. She was new to Hillsborough High, her first year teaching, fresh from graduate school. But her eyes already carried the watchfulness of someone who understood which lines not to cross. "Mr. Moore," she said, lowering her voice as she set the portfolios on a nearby table. "Can I speak to you for a moment?" He stepped down from the ladder, dusting his hands. "Sure." She glanced down the hallway to make sure they were alone. "I saw what happened yesterday with Brent Colson. I appreciate that you stepped in." Elias studied her face, noting the tightness in her jaw. It was the right thing to do. Her tone softened, but her words did not. "I am telling you this because I do not want you blindsided. Around here there are families no one touches. Not teachers, not administrators, not if they want to keep their positions." He understood the meaning, but he let her continue. "Brent's father sits on the school board. His mother is on the fundraising committee. They can call a meeting and make decisions faster than anyone can react. And Amina," she hesitated, "there is a reason everyone is silent when she walks by. People know who her mother is. That makes her both untouchable and a target." Elias felt the truth of it settle heavily in his chest. "So what are you saying, that I should look the other way?" "I am saying this school is complicated," Kayla replied carefully. "Complicated in ways that punish the wrong people for the right actions." She picked up the portfolios and walked back toward her classroom, leaving Elias in the stillness of the art wing, the echo of her warning following him. That afternoon, the hallways swelled with the noise of dismissal. Students surged toward the exits, lockers slammed shut, laughter mingled with the shrill calls of friends finding each other. Elias was wheeling his supply cart toward the east doors when a sharp burst of voices drew his attention. He paused near the corner of the athletic wing, hidden from sight by a row of trophy cases. The voices were male, young, and loud enough to carry over the din. "She thinks she is better than everyone else," one boy said. Another snorted. "Just because her mom works for the Pentagon, we are all supposed to bow down?" The third boy laughed in a way that made Elias's hands tighten on the cart handle. "Better watch what you say. You know the stories, top secret this, classified that. Her mom could probably make us disappear. Or make you clean toilets," the first boy added with mock seriousness, and they all laughed. Then came words that stripped the humor from the air. Racial slurs, spoken without hesitation, sharp as thrown stones. Elias stepped out from behind the corner before he could decide otherwise. The laughter stopped. Brent Colson stood in the middle, flanked by two of his teammates. His smirk faltered for a fraction of a second before returning, slower this time. "Gentlemen," Elias said, his voice low but carrying. Brent shifted his weight, folding his arms. "We are just talking, Mr. Moore." I heard more than talk," Elias replied. His eyes swept over each of them in turn, steady and unblinking. "You will clean up your words the way you clean up your locker area, thoroughly, and starting now." The smaller boy on Brent's right looked down at his shoes. The other shifted uncomfortably. Brent's smirk deepened, but his eyes narrowed. "Yes, sir," he said, the politeness coated in sarcasm. Elias held his gaze a moment longer before stepping aside. The three moved past him, but not without Brent throwing one last glance over his shoulder. A look that was not fear, not exactly, but the promise of something left unfinished. The next morning, the smell of coffee and floor polish drifted through the main office. Elias had just finished repairing a sticky door latch when the receptionist called his name. "Mr. Moore, Principal Holloway would like to see you." The principal's office was immaculate, the desk free of anything unnecessary, the blinds tilted to let in a controlled amount of light. Ray Holloway was a tall man, with careful posture and a voice that always seemed to aim for calm. "Elias," he said, gesturing toward the chair opposite his desk. "Thank you for coming in." Elias sat, waiting. "I have heard about a few interactions you have had with students recently," Holloway began, folding his hands. "I want to be clear, your dedication to the safety of this school is appreciated, but I am concerned about escalation." "Escalation," Elias repeated. "Yes, the Colson family, for example. And now there is talk about remarks made toward Miss Carter. I understand your desire to step in, but I think perhaps your presence here is becoming a point of tension. Elias kept his voice even. My presence or my actions? Holloway's smile did not change, but the pause before his answer was telling. Sometimes those are the same thing. I am suggesting we consider moving you to another facility for a while, one of the elementary campuses perhaps, just until things settle. Settle for whom? Elias asked quietly. Holloway's gaze drifted to a framed certificate on the wall. For everyone involved. The words were meant to sound neutral, but Elias heard what lay beneath them. This was not about balance. It was about removing the one person willing to stand in the way. The principal rose, signaling the meeting was over. Think about it, Elias. Let me know by the end of the week. As Elias stepped out into the hallway, the school's morning bell rang, and the doors of nearby classrooms swung open. Students spilled into the corridor, their voices rising in waves. Somewhere down the hall, the red and gold flash of Brent's varsity jacket moved among them like a warning. Elias walked past without breaking stride, but his thoughts were already bracing for what was coming. The warning had been given. The choice of what to do with it would be his alone. It began as a faint hum in the background, a handful of students huddled over their phones near the vending machines, murmuring and glancing toward the custodial office. By mid-morning, the hum had become a steady thrum, a current running through every corridor. Elias felt it before he saw it. Eyes lingered longer. Conversations stopped when he passed. In the teacher's lounge, the truth came into view. A laptop sat open on the counter. Its screen paused on a frozen frame of him, shoulders squared, jaw set, standing in the hallway with Brent Coulson only 2 days earlier. The image alone radiated tension. But when a young science teacher clicked play, the sound filled the room. It was his voice, stripped from context, lowered to a tone that, when paired with the right frame, could be called threatening. You will clean up your words, starting now. The clip ended there, abrupt, without the shift in his expression, without Brent's sarcastic reply, without the quiet dispersal of the group. The silence afterward was the kind that assumes guilt. The video had been edited masterfully, angles cut to remove the racial slurs that had sparked the confrontation, the laughter that had died at his arrival, the mocking, yes sir, meant to provoke. In its place was a portrait of a man looming over a student, a clenched fist just out of frame, the implication doing more damage than any visible action could. By noon, it was no longer contained to the school. Parents were calling. The district office wanted answers. Elias was summoned to Principal Holloway's office, the air heavy with the scent of polished wood and the rustle of papers that had already decided his fate. Elias, Holloway began, voice steeped in practiced calm. Given the attention this recording has received, we have no choice but to place you on administrative leave, effective immediately. Leave? Elias repeated, his mind catching on the word as if it were a loose thread. You will continue to receive pay while we investigate, Holloway said quickly, as if compensation could soften the sting of public judgment. This is about protecting the integrity of the school and ensuring our students feel safe. Safe. Elias almost laughed, but the sound would not come. And what about the truth? Holloway's eyes flicked briefly toward the blinds, avoiding him. Truth will have its day. For now, I advise you to go home, rest, and let the process work. The process. Elias had seen processes grind men down to dust before, leaving their dignity scattered like debris in the wind. That evening, Kayla found him in the parking lot. The sky above them split between fading orange and deepening blue. She moved quickly, looking over her shoulder before speaking. I saw the clip, she said, her voice low but urgent. It is a lie. I was there. I know what happened. Elias studied her, reading the tremor in her hands. Then tell them. She hesitated, the space between breaths stretching too long. If I speak up, they will make me the next problem to solve. I have a contract renewal coming up. I cannot afford. The sentence withered under the weight of her own guilt. I understand, Elias said, though the words felt heavier than they should. He did not blame her, not entirely. Fear was a weapon here, wielded with precision. Kayla's eyes glistened under the harsh glare of the parking lot lights. I am sorry. She turned away before the apology could become anything more. 2 days later, he returned to the campus, not to work, but because he could not stay away. The bleachers behind the gym were nearly empty, save for a scattering of students avoiding the noise of the main building. that was where he saw her. Amina sat near the top, sketchbook resting on her lap, her pencil moving in quick, deliberate strokes. She looked up as he approached, her expression unreadable at first. Then her gaze locked onto him, steady and unflinching. "They are going to make you disappear, are they not?" she asked quietly, her voice carrying farther than its volume should have allowed. The words landed with the weight of something more than curiosity. They were a statement, an understanding. Elias opened his mouth to answer, but the bell rang, sending the few scattered students to their feet. Amina did not move. She only waited, the question lingering between them like a shadow stretching toward the edge of the day. And for the first time in years, Elias found himself without an answer. Elias stood in the narrow, dimly lit storage room at the end of the east wing, his hands braced against the cool metal of a mop sink. The smell of disinfectant filled the air, sharp and clean, almost out of place against the heaviness in his chest. He had found Amina there after lunch, sketchbook tucked beneath her arm like a fragile piece of armor. "I do not want you involved in this any more than you already are," he said quietly, each word weighed and measured. His voice carried no anger, only a kind of weary urgency. "Let me handle it." Her eyes met his for the briefest moment. There was something in them, a spark that refused to be smothered, but she nodded and turned away. He could not tell if it was agreement or simply her way of ending the conversation before it dug any deeper into old wounds neither of them were ready to share. The next afternoon, the air in Mr. Fowler's history class was heavy with late-day lethargy. The fluorescent lights hummed faintly, illuminating rows of students who looked half asleep until Fowler's voice rose with unusual energy. "This," Fowler declared, tapping the smartboard where a news headline about a school staff incident glowed, "is what happens when people act outside their role. Good intentions do not excuse overstepping boundaries. In many cases, such actions cause more harm than good." The words were carefully chosen, but there was no mistaking the reference. The image on the board had been blurred for privacy, but the shape, the posture, everyone in the room knew it was Elias. In the middle of the third row, Amina's pencil froze mid-sketch. She could hear the faint rustle of whispers from the back of the room, the soft, sharp laughter of a few voices she recognized all too well. She felt the blood rush to her face, a heat that pushed against the walls she had built to keep herself invisible. Her chair scraped against the tile as she stood. The sound was small, yet in the silence that followed Fowler's statement, it was deafening. Every head turned. "Mr. Fowler," she said, her voice steady but edged with steel, "what happened in that hallway was not an overstep. It was the only reason I was not on the floor longer than I was." A murmur rippled across the room. Brent shifted in his seat 2 rows over, his gaze locked on the desk in front of him, jaw tight. Amina did not stop. "I was shoved. Hard. My books hit the ground. No one helped, no one except Mr. Moore. And the one who shoved me," she turned her head deliberately, eyes meeting Brent's, "was Brent Colson." It was the kind of moment that split the room into fault lines. A few students inhaled sharply. 2 at the back nodded in quiet agreement. Someone whispered, "I saw it too," just loud enough to be heard. Brent's friends sat frozen, their usual smirks gone, replaced by an unfamiliar stillness. But in Brent's eyes, dark and narrowed, there was no uncertainty, only a promise, cold and unspoken. Mr. Fowler cleared his throat, his gaze flicking between Amina and the rest of the class. "This is not the time or place." But the room had already shifted. Some students leaned forward as though something invisible had just cracked open. Others stared at their desks, unwilling to pick a side in a battle that now had a name and a face. The bell rang with an almost merciful finality. Chairs scraped, backpacks zipped, and the class emptied in a rush of voices that felt louder than usual. Amina gathered her things slowly, each movement deliberate, refusing to look at Brent as she walked past. That night, Elias thought of her words over and over as he sat at his kitchen table. He imagined the courage it had taken to speak out, knowing full well the retaliation that could follow in a place where silence was often the only shield. His hands clenched without realizing it. He told himself he would keep an eye out. He told himself that maybe, just maybe, the truth spoken aloud could be enough. He was wrong. The next morning, the hallway smelled faintly of paint before Amina even reached her locker. She knew before she saw it. Students loitered nearby, some pretending to check their phones, others just watching. The metal door was no longer its usual dull blue. Across it, in jagged red spray paint, a single word screamed, "Snitch!" The paint dripped in uneven streaks, still fresh enough to glisten under the lights. Beneath the lock, on the narrow ledge of the vent, sat her sketchbook. It was no longer the smooth black surface she kept pristine. Across its cover, a thick smear of wet brown mud marked the outline of a shoe sole, grinding down into the paper. For a moment, the hallway seemed to tilt. The noise of chattering voices faded to a low, distant hum. She felt her hand move to touch the book but stopped halfway, as though even contact might seal this moment into something permanent. Somewhere behind her, someone laughed. It was low, quick, and cruel, like a match struck in the dark. The rain had stopped by late afternoon, but the air still carried the smell of wet pavement when Elias felt the tap on his arm. He was locking up the custodial storage room when Kayla's voice came low, almost urgent. "Can you meet me in the west stairwell?" The west stairwell was rarely used. Most students avoided it because the light flickered and the echo of footsteps seemed too loud in its narrow concrete spine. Elias followed her there, boots making soft, deliberate thuds on the steps. When he pushed open the heavy door, Kayla was already halfway up the landing, a tall boy in a dark hoodie standing beside her. The hood was pulled low, shadowing most of his face, but his posture told Elias more than his expression could. Shoulders tight, hands in pockets. The kind of tension that came from knowing you were taking a risk simply by being in the room. "This is Devin," Kayla said quietly. "He found something." Devin looked up just enough for Elias to see the glint of his eyes. "The clip," he said, voice steady but low. "The one everyone saw of you threatening Brent? I downloaded the original from the school server before they pulled it. I compared it to the one going around." Elias's chest tightened. "And?" "There's metadata," Devin continued, pulling a slim laptop from his backpack and setting it on the concrete step. "Timestamps that do not match. Frames removed. Audio spliced. The original shows Brent taking the first step toward you. The edit," he paused, his mouth tightening, "makes it look like you lunged at him without provocation." Elias crouched, his eyes locked on the screen as Devin clicked through windows filled with code and time markers. The numbers meant little to most people, but the sequence of still frames told a story Elias recognized all too well. The truth had been cut apart, rearranged until it was unrecognizable. "Why are you showing me this?" Elias asked. "Because it is wrong," Devin said simply. Then his gaze flicked toward Kayla, and the hesitation crept back in. "But you cannot use my name. If they know I touched this, I will be next." Elias studied the boy. "They?" Devin said nothing, but his silence was answer enough. Kayla shifted, her voice tight. "He is telling the truth, Elias. If word gets out, he will be a target. You know how this school works." Elias nodded once. "Then your name does not leave my mouth." For a moment, there was nothing but the hum of the old fluorescent light above them, flickering every few seconds. Devin closed his laptop, slid it back into his bag, and disappeared down the stairwell without another word. Kayla lingered, her eyes searching Elias's face. "Be careful. This is not just about Brent anymore." By the next morning, Elias understood exactly what she meant. The hallway outside Amina's locker was crowded, the noise a restless, buzzing tide of voices. He was pushing his cart toward the science wing when he saw her, frozen in place, her locker door hanging open like a wound. Papers lay scattered across the floor, edges curled from water damage. Pages from her sketchbook, beautiful, intricate pencil work, had been torn out, crumpled, and stuffed into a clear plastic bag. The bag was dripping. Elias followed her gaze to the nearest bathroom door, where a few boys were drifting out, smirking. One of them tossed an empty paper towel roll over his shoulder without looking back. Inside, the stench hit first. Bleach, urine, and something sour. In the far stall, the toilet bowl was a swirling ruin of gray paper and shredded drawings, ink bleeding into the water like veins of smoke. Amina stood just inside the doorway, her face pale, her sketchbook cover still in her hand. She looked at it as though it were the last solid thing she could hold on to. Elias stepped forward, but she shook her head, lips pressed together so tightly they were almost white. It was the first time he had seen her look. Not defeated, but dangerously close to it. That afternoon, after the students had gone and the school fell into its usual after-hours quiet, Elias found an envelope wedged into the gap beneath the custodial office door. The paper was thick, the kind that did not bend easily. His name was written in neat block letters across the front. Inside was a single card. The top half bore the insignia of the United States Army, gold against deep green. The message was brief. You are invited to the memorial service for Lieutenant Colonel Daniel Reeves, Fort Kingsley, Saturday at 12 o'clock noon. Beneath it, a single line handwritten in black ink. It has been too long, brother. Kyle. Elias sat down heavily in the wooden chair by the desk, the invitation trembling in his hands. The past, which he had kept sealed away behind the routines of mops and brooms, had just slipped into the room without knocking. The morning sky was the color of pewter, heavy with unfallen rain, when Elias turned his truck onto the long, winding road toward Fort Kingsley. The base rose out of the mist like a quiet fortress, its gates flanked by two weathered stone pillars that seemed older than the town itself. At the entrance, a soldier in dress uniform checked his invitation, saluted, and waved him through. The memorial hall stood at the far end of the parade ground, a domed building of white stone whose steps were lined with flags at half-mast. Elias parked in the outer lot, the tires crunching over gravel, and sat for a moment in the cab with the engine ticking as it cooled. He adjusted the collar of his jacket, then stepped out into the cool air. Inside, the hall was hushed, the air carrying the scent of polished wood and brass. Rows of chairs faced a low stage, where a large photograph of Lieutenant Colonel Daniel Reeves rested on an easel, framed by wreaths of white lilies and folded flags. The sound of quiet footsteps and muted voices drifted through the space, each one softened by the high dome overhead. Elias took a seat near the back, his posture straight, his hands resting loosely on his knees. He recognized a few faces from years past, men and women who had worn the same uniform, who had once carried the same weight. Some nodded in silent greeting, others glanced away, their expressions caught between familiarity and time's erosion. When the ceremony began, a color guard entered, their movements precise, the flags dipping in solemn respect. The chaplain spoke first, his words weaving memories of Reeves as a commander, a mentor, and a friend. Then came others, officers, soldiers, even a medic who recounted how Reeves had shielded him during an ambush. And then Elias saw her. Lillian Carter approached the podium with the quiet authority of someone used to standing before both strangers and soldiers. Her hair, streaked with silver, was pulled neatly back. The uniform she wore was pressed to perfection. The medals on her chest caught the soft light, each one a testament to moments of danger and choice. Her voice was steady, carrying through the hall without effort. She spoke of Reeves not just as a fellow officer, but as a man who believed in duty beyond orders. She told of missions they had shared, of nights when the desert wind carried both hope and fear, of the kind of leadership that earned loyalty without demanding it. Then her tone shifted, gentler, more personal. There was a day, she said, her gaze fixed on a point far beyond the room, when the battlefield closed in on me. The air was thick with dust, the sound of gunfire too close to tell from which direction. I was certain I would not see another dawn. And then, someone pulled me out. Someone whose name I did not know. He left before I could thank him, but I remember his face. A murmur moved through the audience, but Lillian's voice did not waver. In recent days, she continued, another act of courage reached my ears. A man who stepped between my daughter and danger, without hesitation. Her eyes, sharp and searching now, swept the hall. And I believe it was the same man. Her words hung in the air, a fine thread stretched taut. Elias felt the shift before it happened, the slow turn of her head, the narrowing of her eyes as her gaze found him in the back row. Recognition was not loud. It was quiet, precise, like the click of a safety being released. For a long moment, she simply looked at him. The hum of the ceiling fans, the rustle of uniforms, all of it faded until there was only that line between their eyes. She finished her remarks without breaking the connection, her voice returning to its steady cadence. The audience rose in polite applause as she stepped down from the podium, moving along the front row as though nothing had changed. But when she reached the side aisle, her path curved toward him. Her footsteps were measured, her gaze unwavering. When she stopped beside him, she leaned just close enough that her words would not carry beyond the space between them. "It is you," she whispered. Elias's reply was a single, almost imperceptible nod. And in that instant, the years between them folded like paper, dust, smoke, the searing light of a war zone rushing back in silence. Her eyes, bright with memory, met his, and neither needed to speak the rest. The rain that had threatened all morning finally broke in the early afternoon, casting a veil of silver over the streets. Alias followed Lillian into a small coffee shop tucked between an antique bookstore and a tailor's shop. The bell above the door gave a muted chime as they stepped inside. Warm air, heavy with the scent of roasted beans and cinnamon, wrapped around them like a quiet reprieve from the damp outside. They chose a corner booth, half hidden behind a high shelf of potted ferns. The world beyond the rain-streaked window seemed distant here, muted. For a time, the only sounds were the low murmur of other patrons and the soft hiss of the espresso machine. When their coffees arrived, hers black, his with a hint of cream, they sat without speaking, as if the first sip would anchor them before the weight of their words pulled them under. It was Lillian who broke the silence. "I raised my daughter inside a wall of silence," she said quietly, her fingers circling the rim of her cup. "Not because I wanted distance, but because I thought if she did not know certain truths, she would be safer. I told myself it was protection." She looked up, the faintest tremor in her eyes. In truth, it was fear. Fear that the world I lived in, the world I fought in, would reach for her one day. Elias studied her, seeing not just the decorated officer but a mother holding on to a decision that had gnawed at her for years. He could hear in her voice the unspoken regrets, the questions that had kept her awake on too many nights. "I understand fear," Elias said at last, his voice low, steady. "But I also know what it costs." He let his gaze drift for a moment to the rain outside, the blurred shapes of passing cars. "Years ago in Kandahar, we were evacuating civilians after a roadside explosion. There was a boy, 9, maybe 10 years old. He was holding his sister's hand. I told him to stay close, that I would get them both out. But when the second blast came," he paused, his jaw tightening. "I got the sister out. I never saw the boy again." The space between them held the weight of his words. Lillian's hands stilled on her cup, her eyes locked on his. "That kind of loss, it stays." "It does," Elias said. "And it teaches you that silence does not save people. Action does." For a long moment, the sound of rain filled the booth like an uninvited witness. Then Lillian reached into her bag and withdrew a thick envelope. She slid it across the table, her movements precise. Inside was a formal letter, printed on official stationery, bearing her signature and insignia. "It is a letter of introduction," she explained, "to the Office of the Inspector General. It requests an independent investigation into the incident with Brent and the doctored video." Her voice was firm now, stripped of hesitation. "This time, I will not stay silent." Elias took the envelope, the paper cool beneath his fingers, and looked at her. The resolve in her eyes was unmistakable. Whatever lines she had drawn for herself before, she was ready to cross them now. Outside, the rain began to ease, but the air in the booth remained charged, as if the conversation had shifted something irreversible. By late afternoon, the gray clouds had thinned to streaks of pale light. Across town, the echo of laughter rang out over the high school's emptying athletic field. Brent and his friends stood near the center of the football turf, their voices carrying in the cool air. Amina, alone and clutching her sketchbook to her chest, was walking along the track that curved around the field's edge. Brent spotted her first. A slow, deliberate grin spread across his face. He picked up a football from the ground, tossing it lazily in one hand. Without a word, the others began to circle closer, their footsteps quickening on the artificial turf. "Hey!" Brent called out, his tone mockingly friendly. "Catch!" The ball flew from his hand with sudden force. It struck Amina hard on the side of her head, the impact sharp enough to knock her sideways. She stumbled, dropping her sketchbook, which burst open on the wet ground. Pages, hours of careful pencil strokes, fanned out like fallen leaves. One of Brent's friends had his phone out, recording. Another jogged over, scooping up one of her drawings and holding it to the camera as if it were a joke to be displayed. Their laughter was loud, deliberate, the kind meant to humiliate. Amina crouched to gather her work, her hair falling forward to hide her face, but the recording caught every moment, the scuffed knees, the shaking hands, the smear of mud across one carefully shaded page. When they left, the field was littered with damp, ruined sketches. That night, in living rooms and on phones, the clip appeared online. The shaky video froze on Amina's startled expression before looping back to the moment of impact. Across the top, in bold white letters, someone had typed, "General's girl can't fight back." It spread fast, faster than the rain clouds had lifted that afternoon, until it was no longer just an act of cruelty on a field, but a message carried through every hallway, every whispered conversation, every glance in the cafeteria. And Elias, watching the clip alone in his kitchen, felt the old weight return, not from the battlefield this time, but from knowing the fight had found them again, and it would not end quietly. The auditorium was already full when Elias arrived. The wooden floor creaked underfoot, the air heavy with the mingled scent of coffee from the lobby urns and the faint polish of the school's old stage curtains. Rows of folding chairs stretched toward the podium, where a brass clock ticked softly above the moderator's head. Tonight's community forum was meant to be orderly, 2 minutes per speaker, no interruptions, no exceptions. The rule was printed on the agenda in bold type. Yet the tension in the room suggested that civility might only be a thin veneer over something far more volatile. Parents, teachers, and students filled the space with a restless hum. Some leaned forward as though ready to pounce with questions. Others kept their arms crossed, their faces drawn tight, waiting for their turn to speak. Elias chose a seat near the aisle, close enough to watch without drawing attention. He had no intention of speaking tonight. The last thing he wanted was to give Brent's supporters another reason to sharpen their words against him. But then he saw her, his niece, Mariah, slip into the row just ahead. She looked back, caught his eye, and gave a small, deliberate nod before turning forward. The moderator called her name. Mariah walked to the microphone with a steady pace, her ponytail swaying gently against her back. She was not much older than the students in the front row, but her voice carried through the room with a clarity that seemed to quiet even the restless shifting of feet. "My uncle," she began, glancing briefly at Elias, "does not speak about himself. He works quietly. Some of you may not know him beyond his job here, but I remember the winter night when a man followed me home after basketball practice. I was too afraid to scream. My uncle saw us from down the block. He did not hesitate. He stepped between me and that man, and he made sure I got home safe." Her words settled over the room like a slow-falling snow. "I tell you this because I have seen him protect others before, and I know he would not have intervened at this school unless someone needed him to." She stepped back, her allotted time nearly spent. For a moment, no one spoke. Then the moderator called the next name. A figure rose from the middle rows, Amina. She held her sketchbook against her side, not as a shield this time, but as if it were part of her identity. Her steps to the podium were unhurried, but there was an unmistakable weight in them, the kind of weight that made people turn in their seats. When she reached the microphone, she looked first at the students gathered along the back wall, then at the line of parents in the front. "My name is Amina Carter," she said, her voice steady. "Yes, Carter. My mother is Colonel Lillian Carter." A murmur rippled through the crowd at the name, but Amina pressed on. "I am telling you this because I will not let fear speak for me anymore. 2 weeks ago, Brent Collier shoved me to the ground in the hallway. My books went everywhere. No one helped. No one except Elias." Her gaze shifted deliberately toward the section where Brent and a cluster of his friends sat, their expressions unreadable in the dim light. "And then," she continued, "a video was edited to make it look like Elias was the aggressor. You have all seen it. Some of you believed it." She lifted her sketchbook, opening to a page that now bore faint shoe prints across a half-finished drawing. "This is what they did to my work after I spoke up in class. They destroyed it." And they laughed. There was a sharp intake of breath from somewhere in the back. Amina closed the book with a controlled motion, the sound of the cover snapping shut echoing faintly in the stillness. "I am not here to shame anyone," she said, though her voice was threaded with something colder than simple resolve. "I am here because silence has been the soil where this cruelty grows. I will not be part of it anymore." Her 2 minutes ended, but for several seconds she remained at the microphone, her eyes meeting Brent's with unflinching steadiness. Then she stepped down. The moderator began to call the next name, but the sound was interrupted by the creak of the auditorium doors. Every head turned. The heavy double doors swung open, letting in a current of cooler night air. Through it stepped a tall woman in full military dress uniform, the ribbons on her chest catching the light in muted flashes. The precision of her posture made her presence feel larger than the doorway itself. Colonel Lillian Carter paused just inside, her eyes sweeping over the room in a slow arc. The conversations died at once, replaced by an absolute, almost electric silence. Elias felt the stillness close around him. He knew without a doubt that the next words spoken in this room would change everything. The stillness in the auditorium was almost physical, a weight pressing on every chest as Colonel Lillian Carter walked down the central aisle. Her shoes struck the polished floor in slow, deliberate beats, each step echoing off the high rafters. People shifted, whispering to one another, but the whispers dissolved into silence again as she reached the front. The moderator hesitated, hands folded over the agenda. "Colonel Carter," he began, but she was already at the microphone. She did not look at him. She looked out at the faces, mothers, fathers, teachers, and students, her gaze unwavering. "I am here tonight," she said, her voice deep and steady, "because I have seen enough." The words seemed to draw the air taut. "I have seen the ugly work of rumor. I have seen lies repeated until they feel like truth. I have seen people with authority choose to protect the comfortable rather than the vulnerable." Her eyes traveled to the row where Brent sat. Though she did not name him, the set of her jaw made the target unmistakable. What happened in these halls is not a disagreement between students. It is not harmless horseplay. It is violence, physical, emotional, and yes, racial. And when those who harm are shielded, the harm deepens. She stepped forward, the microphone catching the low steel in her tone. "You all know me as Colonel Carter. Before that, I was a young lieutenant in an overseas unit. There was a night when my convoy was ambushed. I was certain I would not live to see dawn. A man pulled me from the wreckage and carried me to safety. His name was Elias." A ripple of surprise crossed the audience. Elias sat motionless, but his fingers tightened around the brim of his cap. "That same man," she continued, "stood between my daughter and another act of violence just weeks ago. He did not ask if it would cost him. He did not weigh what the headlines might say. He acted. And for that, he has been maligned, suspended, and left without the support of this institution." She turned then, not to the crowd, but to the long table where the school board sat in a tight line. Reaching into her briefcase, she withdrew a sealed envelope. "This," she said, laying it before the chairperson, "is my formal request for 2 actions. First, the immediate reinstatement of Elias to his position. Second, the initiation of a Title VI and Title IX investigation into the pattern of racial harassment and gender-based targeting that my daughter and others have endured here." Her voice did not waver, but her eyes burned. "You have the power to either uphold the law or prove yourselves complicit in breaking it." No one moved as she stepped back from the microphone. Somewhere in the back, a chair scraped against the floor. The forum continued, names called, statements made, but the room's center of gravity had shifted. Lillian had planted something here tonight, something that would not be easily uprooted. Far across campus, in the dim hallway outside the art wing, Brent Collier's laughter broke the quiet. He was alone except for 2 of his closest friends, both glancing over their shoulders as if the walls themselves might be listening. "Hold it steady," Brent muttered, lifting the crude figure he had prepared. The doll was dressed in a scrap of fabric torn from an old skirt, its dark yarn hair knotted tight. Around its neck, a thin cord looped into a noose. He hung it from the top vent of Amina's locker, the small form swaying gently in the draft from the heating system. Then, as if that were not enough, he took a black marker and scrawled 3 words above the lock, words that carried the weight of generations of hate. One of his friends hesitated. "Brent, this is—" "Just film it," Brent said, his grin stretching into something sharper. The phone camera caught everything: the noose, the doll, the locker number. Brent leaned into frame, pointing at it as though it were a trophy, his laughter ringing in the empty hall. By the time Lillian left the forum that night, the first copies of the image were already in motion, shared in a private group chat, then sent to others, then passed to someone who posted it publicly. Within an hour, the photograph of the locker and its grotesque display was on every major social media feed in town. The comments came fast, in long scrolling chains: disbelief, outrage, denial, and defense. By midnight, the story had spread beyond the town's borders. News alerts lit phone screens, group texts buzzed without pause, and in every corner of the community, people were choosing sides. The quiet of the school corridors was gone now, replaced by the roar of a town that had been forced to look directly at something it could no longer pretend not to see. And somewhere in that rising storm, Brent Collier had no idea just how far the consequences would reach. The vote came just after nightfall. The school board chamber was a square room of polished oak tables and rows of folding chairs. But that night, it felt like a stage under siege. The air was thick, with the stale scent of coffee left too long on a warmer. and the murmur of restless parents filled the space like a tide pressing against stone. The board chair called for order. Pages rustled. Someone coughed into a sleeve. "One motion on the floor," the chair said evenly, though his voice carried an edge of strain. "To open a formal investigation into the incident, to suspend Brent Collier and his associates pending results, and to reinstate Mr. Elias Ward under specified conditions." No one moved at first. Then slowly a hand rose, hesitant, as though testing the air. Another followed, then another. In the end, all but 2 hands were up, firm and unwavering. The chair's gavel came down with a hollow crack. The motion carries. The room exhaled, but the release was not relief. It was more like the loosening of a knot that had only been half untied. Some parents clasped their hands together, nodding quietly. Others leaned toward one another in clipped whispers. Elias did not smile. He stood as if still in uniform, shoulders squared, eyes steady, absorbing the decision without betraying the weight it placed on him. Lillian Carter, seated 2 rows back, caught his gaze. She gave the smallest of nods, not one of celebration, but of acknowledgement. She had fought to pull this truth into the light, but both of them knew it was not a victory. It was an opening in a wall that could still close again. The following morning, the world outside was silvered with the first frost of the season. Elias arrived early to his office, though it still felt more like a borrowed room than a reclaimed post. The space smelled faintly of dust and lemon polish. He was hanging his coat on the back of the door when he heard the faint slide of paper against wood. Looking down, he saw a large envelope lying on the floor, its thick edge pressing against the toe of his boot. In block letters, across the front, "Internal Memorandum." He broke the seal and drew out a 3-page document stamped with the district seal in deep blue ink. The language was precise, almost surgical. Asterisk establishment of a confidential hotline for anonymous reporting available 24 hours a day. Asterisk comprehensive audit and repositioning of all security cameras, including coverage of previously unmonitored corridors and gathering spaces. Asterisk. A 90-day timeline to review and revise all policies relating to discrimination, harassment, and student safety. He read it twice. Not for the content, he understood each bullet point perfectly, but for the quiet between the lines. The document was the system's unspoken admission that it had failed. Yet the same words could evaporate into nothing if vigilance waned. Elias set the final page on the desk, his hand lingering on it as though pressing it into permanence. Then, with deliberate care, he folded the memo and placed it in the top drawer. The metallic click of the drawer shutting echoed faintly in the empty room. By late afternoon, the sun had slipped low, casting long bars of amber light across the narrow windows of the maintenance wing. Amina appeared at the doorway, her hands tucked into her sleeves, her posture tentative but eyes watchful. "I thought you might need help unpacking," she said softly. He gestured toward the stack of boxes the district had returned to him. "If you are sure you want to." They worked in unhurried silence. The first box yielded practical objects, a pair of worn leather gloves, the stitching darkened from years of use, a thermos with the paint chipped away near the handle, and a neat stack of training manuals, each with pages marked by folded corners. In the second box, beneath a folded jacket and a scattering of small tools, Amina's fingers touched something different. It was a small, weathered envelope, edges frayed as though carried in a pocket for too long. The ink on the front had softened to brown, but the name remained clear and unbroken. Elias Ward. Amina's gaze lifted to him. "This was in the box," she said, almost as if offering a fragile object from the past. Elias looked down, and in that moment his expression shifted. Surprise first, then recognition, followed by a kind of stillness that came from old wounds reopening. "Open it," he said quietly. She slipped a thumb beneath the flap. The paper inside was thin, folded twice. As she unfolded it, the faint scent of cedar rose from the fibers, as if it had been stored in a drawer alongside more personal belongings. The handwriting was firm, each letter purposeful, and yet the tone was warm, alive on the page. It was dated many years earlier. At the bottom, the signature, Lillian Carter. Amina read in silence for a moment, then looked up. "She wrote this to you?" "Yes," Elias said, his voice carrying both gravity and gratitude. "A long time ago." That evening, the Carter living room was dim except for the amber glow of a single lamp. Outside, the wind pressed against the windows, carrying the faint scent of smoke from a neighbor's chimney. The steady tick of the mantel clock filled the spaces between breaths. Lillian sat in her armchair, the letter resting in her lap. Her eyes followed the words she herself had written, but which now felt as though they had come from another lifetime. In those lines, she had thanked Elias for saving her life, without naming the place, the year, or the danger, but both of them would always know. She had promised to speak his name when others would not. She had admitted that some debts could not be repaid, but that gratitude could still live, steady and unspoken, in the space between people. She had not read those sentences in years. Seeing them again was like hearing her own voice carried back to her from a long distance, shaped by a younger self who had not yet learned how silence can grow heavy. A tear slid down her cheek, warm against the cool air of the room. She pressed the corner of the page lightly, as though steadying it. Elias stood by the window, his hands behind his back, gazing out at the streetlights that flickered on one by one. His silhouette was calm, but there was a stillness to it that Lillian recognized from the field when a person waits for the right moment to move, knowing that it will matter. She looked from the letter to him, her voice soft but carrying the weight of something that had waited too long. "Elias, shall we write a new letter?" For a heartbeat, nothing moved. Then he turned, meeting her gaze directly. His answer came not in haste but in certainty, a single, steady nod. Outside, the night settled over the neighborhood, cloaking the houses in darkness. Inside, the air between them held a quiet resolve. The words of that next letter had not yet been formed, but they existed already, in intent, in shared history, in the understanding that some truths must be spoken before they can take root. The autumn sun was low enough to turn the school's front lawn into a wash of gold. The grass, still touched by the cool breath of morning, gave way under the weight of 4 figures seated in a loose circle. Around them lay a scattering of supplies, sketch pads, pencils, a chipped compass, and a sheaf of unlined paper that fluttered when the wind leaned in. Lillian Carter sat cross-legged, her uniform jacket folded neatly beside her. Her eyes were softened by a quiet focus, as she drew the careful outline of a compass, the pencil moving with the steadiness of someone who knew how to plot a direction in uncharted terrain. Beside her, Amina leaned forward over her pad, curls falling to shadow her face, tracing the curve of a hand clutching a paintbrush. The air between them hummed with unspoken understanding. Elias Ward was opposite them, his large hands dwarfed by the slim barrel of a pen. The bristles of a broom lay sketched in front of him, simple, functional, yet drawn with the same precision he might once have used to assemble a rifle. And next to him, his niece crouched low, the tip of her pencil darting across the page in light, quick strokes. Her creation was the most delicate of all, a pair of paper wings, folded in mid-flight. They were not drawing for art alone. Each page would carry a single line at its top, written in clean, unwavering letters. "We will not be silent in the face of injustice." The words had been agreed upon with the gravity of an oath. No signatures yet. Those would come after the ink of the commitment had settled into the fibers of the paper, after each of them had laid down not just their names but the weight of their intent. The campus was unusually quiet. Classes had ended early for a teacher development day, leaving the building hollow. That silence worked in their favor. No one hurried them. No one interrupted to question why the 4 of them were gathered where students usually sprawled for lunch. The only sounds were the distant rustle of branches and the occasional tap of a pencil being set down. Lillian glanced up from her compass and let her gaze travel around the circle. In Elias's face, she saw the same controlled calm that had carried him through the board's reinstatement vote. But there was something else too, a softness, like the surface of water after a long wind. In her niece's quick, bright strokes, she recognized the urgency of youth, that refusal to wait for permission to move. And in Amina's work, there was a concentration so deep it seemed to shield her from the outside world, even as she gave it something new. When they finished, the 4 drawings rested in the middle of the circle like offerings. Amina was the first to move. She lifted her page and held it out to Elias. "This is for you," she said. He took it carefully, as though the paper might hold more weight than its thinness allowed. The sketch showed the 4 of them standing shoulder to shoulder. Each held their chosen weapon. Elias, with the broom, drawn at a deliberate angle as if ready to sweep away the dust no one else wanted to see. Amina with a paintbrush raised like a banner. Lillian with the compass pointed toward an unseen horizon. And the niece with her paper wings spread wide, ready to lift from the earth. For a long moment, Elias studied the drawing. His gaze moved from the sweep of the broom bristles to the arc of the wings, to the compass face with its steady north, to the delicate grip on the paintbrush. It was not simply a portrait, it was a map of their shared resistance. He raised his eyes to meet Amina's. "You understand more than most adults I have met," he said. His voice was low, but the air seemed to hold it. The wind stirred, pushing a loose strand of Amina's hair across her cheek. She brushed it back, the faintest smile touching her mouth. Lillian reached for the paper in the center, flipping her compass, drawing over to write the date and the phrase they had chosen. Her niece mirrored her, setting down the wings to inscribe the same words. Soon, all 4 pages bore the same vow. Elias leaned forward, collecting the pages into a neat stack. "We will seal these," he said, "not to hide them away, but to keep them until they are needed again." And the sun had shifted, throwing their shadows long across the grass. Somewhere far off, a bell rang, though it was not for them. Elias reached into his coat pocket and drew out something that caught the light, a folded envelope worn at the corners. Without ceremony, he extended it toward Amina. "This," he said, "was written by Lillian many years ago. She gave it to me at a time when I needed to be reminded that the smallest act can change the course of a life." Amina hesitated, her eyes moving from the envelope to Lillian, whose expression was unreadable but not cold. Elias placed it gently in her hands. "Keep it," he told her. "Not because of who wrote it or who carried it. Keep it so you will remember that what we do, however small it seems at the time, can be the turning point in someone else's story." The moment held. Amina closed her fingers around the envelope. Lillian looked at her niece, then at Elias, and something unspoken passed between them. Recognition, perhaps, or the first trace of a new trust. The wind rose, brushing through the grass, lifting the edges of their drawings. A laugh, light, almost reluctant, escaped from the niece. Amina followed, the sound warming the cool air. Elias's mouth curved, just slightly, and even Lillian allowed herself a low, quiet chuckle. Somewhere in that mingling of voices and wind, the day seemed to expand beyond itself. The camera of the mind pulls back, the 4 figures in their circle, the golden grass bending around them, the sketches like bright fragments scattered on the earth. The sound of laughter fades into the steady rush of air, carrying with it the unspoken promise that this was not an ending, but a beginning. The lawn had long emptied by the time the last rays of sunlight brushed their shoulders. Their drawings lay between them like markers on an invisible map, each one a testament, each one a promise. In the quiet, it was easy to imagine how easily silence might have claimed them. Silence was safe, after all. It kept the peace, smoothed over conflict, and let the days pass without challenge. But silence also let cruelty root itself deep, growing in the shadows until it seemed immovable. What they had done here today was small by any measure. Just 4 people on a patch of grass, with pencils and paper. No grand speeches, no cameras rolling. Yet, as the wind turned the pages gently, the truth became clear. The smallest acts, when done with conviction, can shift the ground beneath us. Elias knew this better than most. He had carried his battles quietly, through years when no one clapped for victories, and no one noticed the wounds. Lillian knew it too. She had learned the cost of holding her words in, the ache of watching wrongs unfold without lifting her voice. And Amina, she was just beginning to discover it, the weight of choice in a world that often told her to endure rather than resist. The world will not change in a single afternoon, no matter how sincere the vow. The forces that protect injustice are patient, and they count on us forgetting. But perhaps that is why small acts matter so deeply. They remind us to keep looking, to keep listening, to keep stepping forward even when no one else moves. If you have ever watched from the sidelines and wished someone would speak, perhaps the story you have just witnessed is for you. Perhaps it is a reminder that the voice you are waiting for might be your own. It does not have to be loud. It just has to be heard. As you close this chapter with us, take a moment to think about the injustices that have passed before your eyes. Think about what it would mean to face them with courage, even in the smallest way. Share your thoughts, your reflections, your own stories, because in telling them, you break the silence that others depend on. And if you wish to walk with us in more stories like this, you know where to find us. The grass whispers as the wind carries their laughter away, and the frame begins to fade. 4 figures remain on the lawn, bound not by blood but by choice, each holding the tools they have claimed as their own. Beyond them, the horizon waits. And somewhere, just out of sight, the next story is already beginning.